There is a scene in the very first episode of Regular Show where Rigby looks directly at the sky and says something that, if you heard it on network television today, you would do a double take. The line was real, it aired, and then Cartoon Network quietly pulled it, re-recorded it with different words, and reanimated the character's mouth so the new words would fit. They did not announce this. Most people who grew up watching the show have never seen the original version, and they have no idea the replacement exists. That is the kind of thing we are covering tonight. Not rumors, not fan theories dressed up as history, but the actual documented record of what got cut, what got covered up, what was hidden in plain sight across the full run of Regular Show from 2010 to 2017, and what the creators were doing underneath all of it, that the network either never knew about or eventually figured out and made them stop. This is a long one. We are going through all of it, from the drug trip student film that the entire show grew out of, through every international censorship edit, every piece of adult humor that slipped past the censors, every hidden lore detail buried in character design and background props, right through to the cosmic mythology of the finale and what the 2026 revival finally brought back. So get comfortable, turn the lights all the way down, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed to Velvo yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. This is the complete record. So let us start at the beginning, not the broadcast beginning, not September 6th, 2010. The real beginning, which is a CalArts student film made in 2006 that contained things no children's television network would ever allow on screen, and which J.G. Quintel sent directly to Cartoon Network executives as a mood reference for the show he wanted to make. That detail alone should tell you something about how Regular Show got made and why it took the shape it did. J.G. Quintel was born in Hanford, California in 1982. He attended College of the Sequoias, then College of the Canyons, and eventually transferred into the California Institute of the Arts in Santa Clarita, which is CalArts, the animation school that has produced more working animators and showrunners than probably any other institution in the United States. What CalArts had, that other schools did not, was a culture of speed and intensity around short film. Students participated in what Quintel described as 48-hour film marathons, where at midnight on a Friday, you drew a word or a concept from a hat, and by Sunday night, you had made a short animated film. No extensions, no notes, no revision process. Just make the thing and live with it. Out of that CalArts environment, and out of the word lollipop pulled from one of those midnight hats, Quintel developed a longer short called The Naive Man from Lolliland, which he worked on for the better part of a year in 2005. The central character was a round, gentle, naive man who had emerged from a land made entirely of lollipops, trying to navigate the confusing logic of a world that did not share his innocence. That character, whose entire design philosophy was built around softness and sweetness and a kind of guileless wonder about everything he encountered, became Pops Maellard. The film won the 2005 Nicktoons Film Festival, and Sam Marin, who would later voice Pops in Regular Show, was one of Quintel's fellow CalArts students during that same stretch of work. Pops exists in the final version of the show because a character Quintel drew from a single word in a hat grew into a festival-winning short. That is where the mythology starts. But the film that matters more, in terms of Regular Show's DNA, is the one Quintel made the following year as his senior CalArts film. It is called 2 in the AM/PM. It was made in 2006, and it is not a children's film. It is not a film that should have had any relationship to a children's television show at all, which makes the fact that it is the direct ancestor of Regular Show one of the genuinely strange secrets in American animation history. The premise of 2 in the AM/PM is this. Two slackers are working the overnight shift at a convenience store on Halloween night. They find Halloween candy that has been laced with acid. They eat it. What follows is a full hallucinatory trip sequence that escalates from mildly weird to genuinely disturbing. And at some point, one of the characters transforms into an anthropomorphic blue jay, and the other transforms into a gumball machine. The blue jay is recognizably the prototype of Mordecai. The gumball machine, with its round body and confrontational, barely contained frustration, is recognizably the prototype of Benson, the park manager who spends 8 seasons on the verge of firing Mordecai and Rigby. Not Rigby, Benson. Rigby was created separately, later, when Quintel drew a raccoon hula hooping and decided the character fit. When Quintel went to pitch Regular Show to Cartoon Network, he did not pitch it verbally in a room. He has said in interviews that the concept was so strange that trying to explain it out loud would have made no sense to anyone. Instead, he pitched it using a storyboard, and alongside the storyboard, he sent Cartoon Network 2 in the AM/PM itself, the acid trip student film, as a reference for the tone and vibe he was going for. He wanted Regular Show to have what he called the intensity of the surreal nature of that film. The thing that the drugs were doing to the characters in that short, the way ordinary reality kept bending and rupturing and becoming something else entirely, that quality is what Quintel wanted to build into a TV PG cartoon for children. He sent this to Cartoon Network, and Cartoon Network said yes. The pitch went through something called the Cartoonstitute project, a Cartoon Network initiative that was designed specifically to let young animators make pilots with no network notes attached. You made the pilot, the network watched it, and if they wanted it, they greenlit the show. Regular Show was one of only 2 series ever picked up out of the Cartoonstitute pipeline, the other being Uncle Grandpa. Adventure Time came to Cartoon Network by a different route, its pilot having originally aired on Nicktoons before Pendleton Ward brought it over. But the 2 shows arriving at the same network at roughly the same time and reshaping what Cartoon Network was in the 2010s is not a coincidence. It is what happens when a network briefly decides to get out of the way. The show was originally called Normal Show, and the setting was not a park. It was a zoo, and Mordecai and Rigby were not groundskeepers. They were zookeepers who took care of humans. The humans were the animals in the exhibit. Quintel later changed the setting to a municipal park and renamed it Regular Show, keeping the irony of the title, because nothing about the show was going to be normal or regular, and the gap between the mundane title and the genuinely bizarre content was part of the joke. The network greenlit Regular Show in August of 2009. The show would premiere just over a year later, on September 6, 2010. And on the very first day it aired, something went wrong. Or rather, something went right and then got taken away. The premiere consisted of 2 episodes. The first was called The Power, and it aired with a line of dialogue that Cartoon Network subsequently decided they could not keep. Rigby, looking at the damage he and Mordecai had caused, says something along the lines of wondering how in the H they were going to fix this S. The letters standing in for hell and stuff, or possibly other words depending on your read of the context. It aired. It was broadcast on American cable television on a weeknight in 2010, and then Cartoon Network went back and changed it. What makes this particular cover-up interesting is the extent of the effort involved. This was not a case where they dubbed a new line over the original audio and called it done. The animation itself had to be changed. When you redub a line in animation, the existing mouth movements, which were drawn to match the original audio, no longer match the new words. So Cartoon Network had the episode reanimated. New mouth shapes were drawn and inserted so that the replacement line, something like, "How in the heck are we going to fix this stuff?" would appear to have always been there. If you watch the episode now on any streaming platform or on any broadcast version, you are watching the redubbed, reanimated edit. The original version, the one that actually aired on September 6, 2010, is not commercially available. This was not a one-time event. Within the first few episodes of the show, Cartoon Network made a second decision about language. The word pissed, specifically the phrase pissed off, had been used in the first 3 episodes. After those episodes aired, the network issued a directive banning the word network-wide, and then, rather than simply not using it going forward, they went back to those 3 already aired episodes and redubbed every instance. Again with reanimated mouths. Pissed became ticked. The characters' faces were redrawn to match the new word. If you were watching the show in 2010 and you saw it on the first broadcast, you saw one version. If you watched a rerun a few weeks later, you saw a different version with different animation, and the show gave you no indication that anything had changed. This is the part that gets me, when you really sit with it. We are not talking about a streaming service quietly updating a file. We are talking about a children's animation studio going back to completed, aired, canonically finished episodes and surgically altering the animation. This costs money. It takes time. It requires the original production materials. The decision to do this, rather than just moving on, tells you how seriously the network took the precedent those words set. Regular Show was already a show that the network sensed was operating near an edge, and they wanted to pull it back before it established the edge as normal. From the creator's side, Quintel was not exactly apologetic about any of this. In an interview with Variety in 2026, reflecting on the whole history of the show, he said the network came to him and made clear they needed him to tone it down and take some of that stuff out. He said it with the calm, slightly amused tone of someone who had spent years finding out how much he could get away with inside a TV PG rating. And the answer turned out to be quite a lot. Before we get into how much he did get away with, though, we need to talk about what happened internationally. Because the domestic American censorship story is actually the mild version. What happened to Regular Show when it left the United States is a much stranger and more varied set of interventions. And some of them are genuinely bizarre when you understand the reasoning. The United Kingdom version of Regular Show was not the same show that aired in the United States. It ran on Cartoon Network UK, and the channel had its own content standards, which in several specific cases were stricter than the American network, and in others worked according to entirely different logic than anything Ofcom adjacent. The most widely documented UK edit involves Party Pete, a side character who appears in the episode of the same name. Party Pete is a human man, extremely enthusiastic about parties, and he has a specific physical comedy bit where he thrusts his pelvis. In the US version, this crotch thrusting gag plays out in full. In the UK version, the crotch is cut out of frame. The camera cuts away to a close-up of Pete's foot tapping instead. The subsequent scene in the same episode, later in the runtime, which involves Pete performing a similar kind of physical comedy with other party guests, was kept in the UK version without any edit. So the decision was not about Pete as a character or about the episode as a whole. It was specifically about that one shot of one thrust. The reasoning for why that moment specifically was cut and the other, functionally similar moment is not documented anywhere I can find. These kinds of edit decisions often are not. The UK also had a specific policy around death language. Regular Show is a show where characters die with some frequency, particularly in the Halloween specials, and the word died appears in normal plot dialogue fairly regularly. In certain UK edits, the line, "but he died," was changed to, "well, he's gone." This is not a universal policy across all death references in all episodes, but it appears in a documented number of instances. The reasoning seems to be a pre-watershed sensitivity around death language directed at children, a concern that the blunt finality of died required softening for younger audiences. What this actually produces, if you think about it, is a version of the show where characters disappear rather than die, which arguably makes the supernatural elements of the show's mythology harder to follow, not easier. The UK also cut a scene involving Muscle Man and a car. In the original episode, Muscle Man puts a cinder block on the gas pedal of a car to make the engine rev continuously. The UK editors removed all shots of this on the grounds of imitative behavior, meaning they were worried children watching at home might go outside and put objects on their parents' car accelerators. This is the kind of content standard that applies to specific physical actions that are technically replicable by an unattended child, regardless of the context in which the action appears. The reasoning is not unreasonable on its own terms. The result is that the sequence in question becomes slightly discontinuous in the UK edit, because the cause of the effect is removed while the effect itself remains visible. There was also a word-level inconsistency between different UK edits that has been noted by fans over the years, with William Salyers, who voiced Rigby, having spoken about it in interviews around the revival. In one version of the UK edits, the word idiot was acceptable, but moron was not. In another, the opposite was true. Salyers described this with the kind of amused bafflement that comes from having been on the inside of a system that makes rules without necessarily having a coherent underlying philosophy. You could say idiot here but not moron, or moron here but not idiot, and if you asked why, there was probably not a satisfying answer waiting for you. Australia had a different problem entirely, and it is the one international regular show censorship story that involves a genuine medical safety concern rather than a taste or language judgment. There is a Season 2 episode called Planet Chasers Starlight Excellent, which features a fictional anime within the show that Mordecai and Rigby are watching. To make the parody feel authentic, The animators deliberately included what is called paka-paka lighting in the fictional anime, which is rapidly alternating red and blue flashes. They were referencing a specific piece of television history, the 1997 Japanese episode of Pokémon, titled Electric Soldier Porygon, in English, which triggered photosensitive epileptic seizures in hundreds of children who were watching it when it aired, sending an estimated 685 to hospital. That incident permanently changed how Japanese broadcasters handled flashing lights in animation. The paka-paka style of flashing became a widely known warning sign in animation after that, and the regular show team put it deliberately into Planet Chaser's Starlight Excellent as a reference. Australia refused to air the episode, not because of taste or language, but because of the seizure risk. The flashing light pattern was real, the medical concern was real, and Australian broadcast standards around photosensitive content are stricter and more consistently enforced than American ones. The episode simply did not air on Australian Cartoon Network. Asia Pacific had a broader and more consistent set of restrictions that affected a larger number of episodes. 3 episodes in particular tell the story. More Smarter is a Season 2 episode in which one of the characters takes a drug called Brain Max, which enhances intelligence. The Asia-Pacific version of this episode was refused entirely. The documented reason involves the explicit drug enhancement premise being considered inappropriate for the region's broadcast standards, combined with the insults and threats the newly intelligent character directs at others. The entire episode was withheld. This is notable because More Smarter is not one of the more outwardly wild episodes of the show's second season. It is a fairly contained story about the consequences of artificially boosting your intelligence and then losing it. But the drug as plot device was enough to trigger a refusal. Brain Eraser is a Season 2 episode that Asia Pacific also refused to air, and the reason here is more straightforwardly about content. The episode contains a scene where Pops exits a shower without clothes. The sexual reference level in the episode overall was high enough that the Asia Pacific network declined it entirely. In Latin America, the episode had a different fate. It was heavily edited down, with blurring, cropping, and alternate footage substituted, until the remaining runtime was under 10 minutes. It was broadcast in this severely truncated form, received negative audience reaction, and was subsequently re-aired in its uncut form. That sequence, where a heavily edited version of a controversial episode provokes enough complaints that the network eventually airs the thing they were trying not to air, is a genuinely strange outcome, and one that probably tells you something about the limits of reactive content censorship. The Night Owl was also refused in Asia Pacific, and this one has a specific word-level edit documented alongside the refusal. The episode contains a line referencing nitrogen, specifically in the context of liquid nitrogen used as a freezing agent. The Asia-Pacific version changed the line from nitrogen to make me famous to freezing liquid to make me famous, and there is documented evidence that the camera was zoomed in on the liquid nitrogen canister, specifically to hide the label. The reasoning, as best as can be reconstructed, involves the word nitrogen being associated in certain regulatory frameworks with chemical or industrial hazards in a way that triggered a content flag. It is an extremely specific object of concern in an episode that contains considerably more dramatic material than a can of liquid nitrogen. Asia Pacific also had a systematic word substitution policy that applied across the entire run of the show. Piss became tick, crap became crud, turd became plank. These were not episode-by-episode judgments, but a standardized list of substitutions that the dubbing team applied throughout the series. Latin America had its own substitution table, and also had a specific cultural sensitivity edit that is worth noting. The character Party Pete, whose name was left unchanged in the American and UK versions, was renamed Beto Bulicio for the Latin American broadcast. The reason is that in Spanish-speaking countries, Pete is slang for a sexual act. Keeping the name as Party Pete would have made the character's entire presence in the episode continuously double meaning in a way the network found unacceptable, so they gave him a different name entirely. Latin America also had an ongoing restriction on magical coffee. Any scene in which coffee was presented as supernatural or magical, as giving characters powers or transporting them into another dimension, was edited out of the Latin American broadcast. This is a more interesting restriction than it might initially appear. because coffee as magical substance is actually a recurring thread throughout regular show's first few seasons. The show uses coffee, caffeine, and stimulants generally as a kind of semi-magical accelerant that pushes episodes into their surreal territory. Removing all of those moments from the Latin American edit would have created noticeable gaps and non sequiturs in certain episodes. The logic behind the restriction is not fully documented, but the most commonly cited interpretation is that it relates to advertising standards around children's media and caffeinated beverages, where showing a product category as magical or wish-fulfilling violates guidelines about not using fantasy to sell things to children. Now let us talk about what the censors did not catch. Because the foreign edit teams and the domestic network standards reviewers were catching a lot of things, but they were missing others, and some of what they missed was not accidental. Regular Show was made by a team of people who had grown up watching the same things. Specifically, they had grown up watching the films and television of the 1970s and 80s and early 90s, and they were hiding references to that material everywhere in the show. Some of these are simple Easter egg stuff, a poster on a wall, a song choice in a montage, but some of them are structural, built into the premise of specific episodes or into character design choices that you would only understand if you were old enough to have the right context. The clearest example of adult content slipping through the domestic US censors is not language or violence. It is a clock. In the Season 2 episode, Do Me a Solid, there is a VCR clock visible in a background shot. The clock reads 4:20. In another episode involving Father Time, the clock in frame also reads 4:20. 4:20 is a widely understood cultural reference to marijuana, originating in American stoner culture as a time associated with smoking. The claim that these clock references are intentional rather than coincidental is supported by the broader pattern of the show's imagery and by the general sensibility of the writing room. But no creator has made a direct statement confirming that the clocks were deliberately set to that time as a hidden reference. What can be said with confidence is that they are there, that they have been documented by fans, that the show contains enough other stoner-adjacent imagery that the interpretation is coherent, and that no one at the network appears to have flagged them during production. Muscle Man's trailer contains a visible Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon poster. The Big Lebowski, the Coen brothers film from 1998, about a slacker who gets tangled in a kidnapping plot, is referenced multiple times across the show's run, in ways that range from visual background gags to episode premises that echo the film's structure. The Big Lebowski is not a children's film. It contains explicit language, drug use, and adult situations. Children watching Regular Show would have seen the references without recognizing them. Adults would have recognized them immediately. The Percolator is a more interesting case. In the Season 1 episode Caffeinated Concert Tickets, the giant sentient coffee bean who antagonizes Mordecai and Rigby uses a device called a percolator. In the context of the episode, a percolator is a coffee-making device, which is exactly what it is. In stoner culture, however, a percolator is also the name for a specific component of a water pipe, a device that filters smoke through water to cool it before inhalation. The visual design of the percolator in the episode draws on both meanings. Children watching the episode would understand it as a coffee gadget. Adult viewers with a different frame of reference would read something else entirely. The show's animators were in their 20s and 30s and had grown up in exactly the culture where both meanings were active. Whether this double meaning was intentional is a question without a confirmed answer. What is interesting about it is not the specific reference, but the method. The design sits exactly at the edge of two different frames of reference, legible as innocent from one side and as something else from the other. And the network standards review process is designed to catch explicit content, not content that requires a specific cultural literacy to read. The unicorns are less ambiguous. In the Season 1 episode, The Unicorns Have Got to Go, a group of unicorns arrive at the park and begin behaving as obnoxious, hard-partying guests. One of the unicorns is dressed in a very specific costume: white shirt, white underwear, a black bowler hat, and eye makeup. If you are of a certain age or have a certain film literacy, you recognize this immediately as the costume worn by Malcolm McDowell's character Alex DeLarge in Stanley Kubrick's 1971 film, A Clockwork Orange. A Clockwork Orange is a film about ultra-violence and state control, adapted from Anthony Burgess's novel. It carries an adult rating in the United States. The costume of its central character is one of the more recognizable images in 20th century cinema. The regular show team put that costume on a background unicorn in a children's cartoon, and no one at the network flagged it, presumably because identifying the reference requires having seen a film that the show's target demographic had not and could not legally watch. This is what I find most interesting about the adult humor that made it through the censorship process. It is not that the writers were being reckless or that they were trying to corrupt anyone. They were making references to their own cultural landscape, the films and music and subcultures they had grown up inside, and embedding those references in a format that read as children's content to people who did not share that landscape. The censorship system was designed to catch explicit content. It was not designed to catch competent cultural literacy. Speaking of the music, Caffeinated Concert Tickets is also notable for being the episode that established the show's sonic identity. The song Working for the Weekend by Loverboy from 1981 plays in this episode. Regular show's use of 1980s music as its soundtrack became one of the show's signature features, and it served the same dual audience function as the visual references. Children heard exciting music. Adults heard their own past. The character design secrets in regular show are less about censorship and more about a set of choices the creators made that reward extremely close attention, and that the show never explicitly draws attention to or explains. Skips is the most significant example. Skips is the immortal Yeti groundskeeper of the park, and he is the only character in the entire show with 5 fingers. Every other character, including the main cast and virtually all the background characters, has 4 fingers. This is standard for the show's cartoon design language, inherited from decades of American animation convention, the logic of which is partly aesthetic, partly historical, and partly about the speed of drawing hands in traditional animation. 4-fingered characters are the visual default. And then there is Skips, who has 5. The Simpsons, one of J.G. Quintel's stated influences, has a version of this convention. Most Simpsons characters have 4 fingers, and there is a fan-documented pattern where divine or special tier figures, specifically God and Jesus in the handful of episodes where they appear, are drawn with 5 fingers. If the same logic is operating in regular show, then Skips's 5 fingers are a marker of his status as something other than an ordinary mortal character. He is immortal, he is connected to cosmic events, and he alone in the park has a full human-style hand. The show never says any of this directly. It is just there in the design, waiting to be noticed. Skips is also voiced by Mark Hamill, which is information that lands differently once you know the show's mythology. Mark Hamill is Luke Skywalker, the most famous hero of a cosmic battle between good and evil in American popular culture. Skips is the character who fights a literal demon every 157 years and cannot die. Whether the casting was a deliberate wink at the character's mythological role or simply a happy coincidence is not something Quintel has addressed directly in any interview I can find. What is true is that it works either way. High Five Ghost has a detail in his design that is never explained and that the show never calls attention to. He is a ghost. He is transparent. He floats. He does all the things cartoon ghosts do. He also casts a shadow. No other character in the show casts a shadow in the same consistent, visible way that High Five Ghost does. A ghost casting a shadow is not meaningless. In the supernatural logic of the show's world, where ghosts exist alongside mortals and immortals and animate household appliances, a ghost who casts a shadow is at minimum unusual. The show never addresses it. It is either a design inconsistency from early production that became a permanent feature of the character, or it is a deliberate detail embedded in the design for reasons the creators have not disclosed. Fan wikis document it. Creator statements about it do not appear to exist. Eileen is a case where the show visibly changed a design between her first appearance and her second, and then simply never acknowledged that anything had changed. In her debut episode, Eileen has plain black dot eyes and thin black-rimmed glasses. In every subsequent episode, she has larger, more expressive eyes and red glasses. The redesign makes her visually warmer and more legible as a sympathetic character, which is consistent with her role in the show deepening over time as she moves from a minor recurring character to one of the central figures of Rigby's emotional arc. But the show does not have an in-universe explanation for why she looks different. You are simply meant not to notice, or to accept that the second design is the correct one. This is a standard animation convention, and not unusual on its own. What makes it worth noting is that Eileen's arc, particularly her relationship with Rigby, is one of the show's most satisfying long-form stories, and the quiet decision to make her more expressive and appealing in her design from the second episode onward reflects a production-level awareness that this character was going to matter. In the series finale, when the story takes us to Lolliland, the homeworld of Pops' origin, there are several background characters visible among the inhabitants. 3 of them, named in production materials as Frivola Cronus, Quadravi Cronus, and Weird Mushroom Guy, are not original characters designed for the finale. They are Quintel's earlier Pops character sketches, concept art from the development period of the show, repurposed as background alien characters in the final episode. It is a loop that closes across a full decade of work. The character Quintel first drew for a 48-hour CalArts film in 2005 is finally going home in the last episode of the show, and the people he is going home to are made from the same sketchbooks where Pops first appeared. The lore of Regular Show is one of the more unusual things about it as a children's cartoon, because it exists at 2 levels that operate almost independently of each other. On the surface level, the show is a workplace comedy about 2 slacker friends in their early 20s who create absurd problems and then have to deal with the consequences. Episodes escalate from mundane premises. Arguing over a video game becomes a battle with a giant floating head. A bet over a soda becomes a negotiation with Death himself, into territory that is genuinely fantastical, but always comes back to the small human stakes of the original premise. This is the show that children watched and that parents could watch alongside them without concern. Under that surface level, though, the show was building a coherent mythology over 8 seasons that tied together every supernatural element, every immortal character, every cosmic threat, into a single story about the nature of good and evil and the cost of sacrifice. Most of this mythology was implicit for the first 5 or 6 seasons. You got pieces of it in individual episodes, but the full architecture was not visible. When Season 8 revealed it completely, and the show ended with Pops dying to save the universe, it became apparent that the quiet accumulation of lore had been intentional all along. Skips is the place where the lore is most concentrated, and his story contains the most secrets. His real name is Walks. He was given that name at birth, or at whatever point in the 18th or 19th century he was alive as a mortal. The reason he is called Skips now, and the reason he is immortal, and the reason he literally skips everywhere instead of walking, are all connected to a single event: the death of a woman named Mona. Mona died because of Clorgbane, a demonic figure who exists in Regular Show's mythology as a recurring supernatural threat. Skips, who was mortal at the time, could not save her. He was subsequently granted immortality so that he could fight Clorgbane every 157 years, because Clorgbane returns on that cycle and only Skips can defeat him. The skipping, the physical habit that defines the character visually throughout the entire show and provides his name, is a memorial. He started skipping because Mona used to like watching him skip. He has been doing it for centuries. Every time you see him skip across the park in an episode about a broken vending machine or a talent show gone wrong, he is carrying a 200-year-old grief. This is revealed in Season 5, in a half-hour special called Skips' Story, which aired on April 14th, 2014. The show had been running for almost 4 years at that point, and in all that time, Skips had been one of the most dependable and beloved characters, the adult in the room, the one with answers, the one who knew how things worked. The revelation that this calm and reliable person is running on centuries of loss, that his most distinctive physical trait is a gesture of mourning he cannot stop performing, is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever did, and almost nobody outside of the fan community talks about it. Tecmo is connected to Skips' past in a way that deepens the lore further. Tecmo, whose original name is Samson, received a wooden arm replacement carved for him by Skips during the American Revolutionary War era, placing his origins somewhere in the late 1700s. He has been alive, in some form, ever since, augmented and transformed by the magical technologies he has encountered across centuries. The connection between Tecmo and Skips implies that the park has been a nexus for supernatural events and immortal beings for much longer than any episode ever explicitly states. The groundskeeping staff of this municipal park have histories that span centuries. The ordinary setting of the show, the gazebo and the coffee machine and the golf cart, exists on top of a much older and stranger infrastructure that the episodes only occasionally reveal. What the Tecmo detail reveals, and this is the thing that gets quietly buried under the comedy of any given episode, is that the park is ancient. Not old in the way that parks are old, not established in the 1800s by a municipal administration and maintained since. Ancient in a deeper sense. The specific geography of this piece of land, the specific people who have tended it, the specific events that have unfolded there, have been accumulating significance for centuries. Every supernatural event that erupts through the surface of an ordinary episode, the demons and the record holders and the cosmic threats, is not random. They are drawn to this place because of what the place is. The park is a kind of axis, a location where the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary is thin. The show never states this directly. It builds the case incrementally, through characters like Skips and Tecmo and the repeated pattern of supernatural events, until the case is made without ever having been made explicitly. This is the show's methodology at its most sophisticated. Regular show never gives you an episode about the nature of the park. It never has a character stand in front of the gazebo and explain that this is where things happen. It just keeps happening there, episode after episode, season after season, until the accumulation of events produces the understanding in the viewer, without the show having to do anything as clumsy as explaining it. Thomas the Goat is a secret that the show buried across multiple seasons before detonating it in season 6. Throughout his time on the show, Thomas presented as a naive, eager intern who was perpetually being mistreated by the rest of the staff and learning lessons about work and responsibility. In season 6, the episode, The Real Thomas, reveals that none of this was true. Thomas is a Russian spy. His real name is Nikolai. He has been embedded at the park as part of a surveillance and intelligence operation, and his entire personality, the naivety, the eagerness, the apparent vulnerability, was a cover. He ultimately chooses to protect the park and its inhabitants, defecting from his mission, and then disappears into protective hiding. The show does not resolve what happens to him after that. The character who spent multiple seasons as the park's put-upon intern turns out to have been, the entire time, a trained intelligence operative. He is last seen going into hiding. We never find out what he became. The cosmic mythology of the finale deserves its own careful telling because it is the most ambitious thing the show ever attempted and the one that most completely recontextualizes everything that came before it. Regular show's universe runs on a cycle. The universe is approximately 14 billion years old. At the end of each cycle, two beings fight to determine what the next cycle will be. One is Pops Maellard, whose cosmic name is Megacranus, and who represents pure good. The other is Anti-Pops, whose cosmic name is Malum Cranus, and who represents pure evil. They have fought at the end of every previous cycle. Every previous fight has ended in a stalemate. The universe resets, and the cycle begins again. This has been happening for 14 billion years. Anti-Pops, in Season 8, breaks the pattern. Instead of waiting for the designated battle, he attempts to kill Pops early, eliminating him before the cycle reaches its conclusion, and ending the universe permanently. This is the threat that drives the space arc, and it is why the stakes of the final season are genuinely cosmic, rather than simply large. The show had spent 7 seasons turning the volume up incrementally, from squirrel-related arguments to battles with ancient demons to interdimensional coffee machines, and it finally arrived at the end of everything. Pops ultimately resolves the cycle not by fighting Anti-Pops to a stalemate, as every previous iteration had done, but by choosing to sacrifice himself. He grabs Anti-Pops and flies them both into the sun. His death breaks the cycle permanently. The universe does not reset. Everyone lives, with the specific exception of Pops, who is gone. What makes this sacrifice feel earned, rather than merely climactic, is the connection to Quintel's original student film. During the cosmic reset sequence in the finale, there is a clip from The Naive Man from Lolliland, the 2005 CalArts short. Pops, whose entire existence in the show began with that film, returns to it at the moment of his death. The show's mythology loops back to its own origin. The creature who was drawn in a 48-hour student film because Quintel pulled a word from a hat ends the universe and saves everyone, and the last image of him is from the very first time he existed. The finale then jumps forward in time, years into the future, to show what happened to the characters after Pops died. This epilogue is where several of the show's most discussed choices are made visible. Mordecai does not end up with Margaret. He does not end up with CJ. For several seasons, the show had developed a love triangle, or more precisely, a love parallelogram, between Mordecai, Margaret the Redbird, and CJ the Cloud. The romantic arc was a genuine through line for the middle seasons, generating real viewer investment, and its resolution is not what the majority of the audience expected. In the flash forward, Mordecai has married a Bat character named Steph, who was not previously in the show. They are artists together. He seems genuinely happy. The show presents this as the correct ending for his character arc, the suggestion being that his prolonged inability to commit to either Margaret or CJ was a form of self-protection that he was finally able to move past with someone outside the familiar dynamic. Whether you find this satisfying depends on how invested you were in the earlier relationships, and the honest answer is that fan opinion on the matter remains divided. What is not debatable is that the choice is consistent with the show's long-running portrait of Mordecai as someone whose emotional directness was always slightly behind his actual feelings. Rigby marries Eileen. They have children together. This is the one finale relationship outcome that most viewers seem to agree was earned, because the show had been building toward it patiently and without overplaying it for most of its run. Rigby's growth as a character over 8 seasons is arguably the show's most complete arc, from an irresponsible, short-sighted, often selfish slacker to someone capable of returning to finish high school and build a life with someone he loves. The fact that he ends up with Eileen, who was always the more competent and grounded of the two and who never stopped seeing the person Rigby could be, is the emotional conclusion that the show had been quietly earning for years. High Five Ghost becomes a DJ. This is a modest triumph for a character who spent most of the series as a reliable but low-profile presence, and it is played with an appropriate low-key warmth in the flash forward. Skip stays at the park. He will still be there when everyone else is gone, which is the specific, irreducible fact of his existence. He outlives everyone, over and over again. He does not get an ending because he does not have one. The production of regular show contained its own layer of secrets, most of which were not hidden by design, but were simply not things the network or the audience thought to ask about. A single episode took 9 months to produce from first concept to finished animation. At any given time, the production team had approximately 20 episodes in simultaneous stages of completion, which means the writing and animating and editing of 20 different episodes was happening in parallel, at different stages of the pipeline, continuously throughout the show's run. This is normal for animated television, but it means the show was always operating at a scale that is difficult to perceive from the outside. You watched 1 episode a week. The team was making a city. The entire show was animated traditionally, on paper. Pencils, post-it notes, whiteout. No digital storyboarding. In an era when most American animation had migrated to digital production, regular show was being drawn by hand on physical materials, in the same way animation had been made for 60 years. This is part of why the show has the visual warmth it does, a quality that is hard to articulate precisely, but that is immediately perceptible. There is a slight roughness to the movement, a quality of genuine physical effort in the drawings, that digital native animation does not produce in the same way. Quintel's team was doing it the old way, and the show looks like something made by human hands because it was. The recording process was unusual for animation. Regular show recorded most of its dialogue with the full cast in the same room at the same time, a practice called ensemble recording. This is uncommon in animation, where scheduling constraints and geographic distances usually mean actors record their lines separately and the performances are layered together in post-production. The difference in result is audible. When actors are in the same room responding to each other in real time, the rhythm of the dialogue is different. Laughs happen at slightly unexpected moments. Characters talk over each other and back off in ways that feel unscripted. The bickering between Mordecai and Rigby, which is the engine of the show, sounds like 2 people who are actually in the same space and actually annoying each other, because when it was recorded, they were. Quintel voiced Mordecai himself. He also voiced High Five Ghost. William Salyers was Rigby. Sam Marin voiced Pops, Benson, and Muscle Man. Mark Hamill was Skips. The fact that the show's supernatural heavyweight, the immortal warrior who has been fighting demons for centuries and carries the grief of a dead woman in the way he walks, was voiced by the man who played Luke Skywalker, is a piece of casting that becomes more poignant the more you know about both characters. By most accounts, Hamill's voice work as Skips was recognized by the animation industry with an Annie Award nomination in the middle stretch of the show's run. The ensemble recording arrangement also means that the cast had a relationship with each other that is audible in the work. When Quintel and Salyers were recording Mordecai and Rigby's bickering, they were bickering in a room together, adjusting to each other in real time, finding the rhythm of an argument the way two people actually find it, rather than the way two people find it when they each record their half separately and the editor glues the pieces together. The show's dialogue has a quality of genuine occupying the same space that you cannot engineer in post-production, and that quality is part of why the central relationship feels real. The hidden secret of Mordecai and Rigby sounding like actual friends is that the people playing them were actually in the same room being actual colleagues, and the recording picked up what that felt like. The production of the film, Regular Show, the movie, which had its festival premiere in the summer of 2015 and a limited theatrical run in August of that year, started during Season 5. The origin story of the film is itself a small piece of behind-the-scenes history. During Season 4, Cartoon Network approached Quintel and asked for a 40-minute special episode, the kind of extended holiday or anniversary production that networks sometimes commission as a prestige event. Quintel turned it down. He told the network he did not want to make a special episode. He wanted to make a full theatrical film. Cartoon Network said yes. The film went into production alongside the continuing series, with the writing team working on both simultaneously. Budget figures reported after release vary widely from source to source, but by most public accounts, it grossed in the neighborhood of $44 million worldwide. And that figure should be understood with the caveat that reporting on limited release films often conflates theatrical revenue with home video and streaming income. Whatever the precise breakdown, it was commercially successful enough to represent a significant achievement for a movie produced concurrently with a running series. Now the Billy Mitchell situation, because it is one of the more unusual intersections of Regular Show and the real world, and because it has a coda that the show's creators did not anticipate when they first put the character on screen. Garrett Bobby Ferguson is a villain who appears in 2 episodes of Regular Show across seasons 2 and 3. He is a giant floating alien head with no body, a world record holder at a fictional arcade game who becomes enraged when his records are challenged. He has long black hair, a long black beard, and the cold, preening charisma of someone who has defined their identity entirely around being the best at one specific thing. If you were familiar with the world of competitive classic gaming in 2011, you recognized him immediately as a parody of Billy Mitchell. Billy Mitchell is, or was, a figure in the classic gaming world known for holding or claiming to hold world records on games including Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. He has long black hair, a long black beard, and a specific public persona built around his championship status. Garrett Bobby Ferguson is not a subtle parody. The physical resemblance was directly intentional. Billy Mitchell sued Cartoon Network. The lawsuit alleged misappropriation of his likeness, essentially arguing that the character's design constituted an unauthorized use of his image for commercial purposes. The case was heard and dismissed in 2015. The court ruled that the character, a giant floating alien head with no body, was sufficiently different from a real human person to constitute transformative use under fair use doctrine. The fictional version of Billy Mitchell was too obviously a cartoon abstraction, too clearly not an attempt to depict the actual Mitchell, for the likeness claimed to hold. Mitchell's public response to the dismissal, as reported at the time, was characteristically composed. He indicated that he did not particularly mind as long as people were talking about him. The lawsuit had, if nothing else, made the parody more widely known, which is the kind of result that makes you wonder whether the publicity calculus was ever primarily about legal remedy. The coda is this. In 2018, 3 years after the lawsuit was resolved in Cartoon Network's favor, Twin Galaxies, the organization that maintains official competitive gaming records, stripped Billy Mitchell of his Donkey Kong and Pac-Man world records, following an investigation into the legitimacy of his claimed scores. The controversy around this decision and its subsequent appeals is ongoing and complicated, and its details are separate from the Regular Show story. What is relevant is the timing. Regular Show created a cartoon villain based on Mitchell in 2011. Mitchell sued and lost in 2015, and the real-world controversy about Mitchell's records erupted in 2018. The parody preceded the public scandal by 7 years. The writers of Regular Show, working from the existing public reputation of a competitive gaming figure, produced a villain whose character logic was proven more accurate than they could have known. There is one more cover-up in Regular Show that is not about censorship or parody lawsuits. It is about the show's premise itself, and it is the most persistent and most interesting piece of fan theory associated with the series. The theory holds that the events of Regular Show are not real. They are the ongoing hallucination of the two characters in 2 AM PM, who ate the laced Halloween candy in 2006. Mordecai and Rigby are not 23-year-old groundskeepers at a municipal park. They are 2 young men having an acid trip that has not ended. Everything, the giant coffee beans and the sentient cassette tapes and the immortal Yeti and the Russian spy goat and the cosmic battle at the end of the universe, is the content of a drug-induced hallucination that Quintel started sketching in a CalArts classroom and never fully resolved. The evidence for this reading is not nothing. The show escalates in exactly the way a hallucinatory experience escalates. Familiar, grounded premises that gradually become stranger, stakes that grow until they encompass the entire universe, a quality of logic that is internally consistent but untethered from ordinary causality. The source material, the explicit drug trip film, is the thing Quintel used to pitch the show. He has said on the record that he wanted the show to have the intensity of the surreal nature of that film. The counter-evidence is that this kind of theory, the "it was all a dream" or "it was all a trip" reading, can be retroactively applied to almost any surrealist work and proves very little. Regular Show earns its surrealism through craft and consistency, not through the absence of reality. The characters have real relationships, real histories, real losses. Pops actually dies. Skips actually grieves. If it is a hallucination, it is one with more emotional weight and consequence than most reality. But there is a detail in the finale that sits in this space between theory and text, and it is hard to ignore. In the final season, Mordecai and Rigby discover something buried in a time capsule in space. Blu-ray copies of Regular Show. The show exists within its own universe. Mordecai and Rigby can hold in their hands the object that represents their own story. It is a fourth wall break, but it is not a cheap one. It confirms that the show is aware of what it is, that the characters' lives are in some sense a production, a thing made and distributed and experienced by an audience. The specific implication, within the logic of the show's mythology, is left open. You can read it as playful self-reference, or you can read it as Quintel acknowledging, in the final season, that the dream has always known it was a dream. Neither reading is wrong. The show earns both. Before moving into what the individual seasons were doing in detail, it is worth pausing on the title itself, because the title of the show is its first and most persistent hidden joke, and it is one that operates differently depending on how long you have been watching. Regular Show. The name sounds like someone accidentally left the adjective off something. Regular Show is just a normal show, a standard show, nothing special here. The irony is immediate and obvious. Nothing about the show is regular. A gumball machine manages a municipal park. A Yeti has been alive since the American Revolution. A man's soul can be claimed in a video game contest. An entire park gets launched into space. The gap between the mundane title and the absolutely unhinged content of any given episode is, from one angle, the whole joke. But the title has a second layer that you only get if you know the history. The original title was Normal Show, and the setting was a zoo where humans were the exhibits. The name change to Regular Show happened alongside the setting change to a park, and both changes moved the show away from a satirical premise, humans as zoo animals observed by anthropomorphic creatures, and towards something more genuinely ambiguous. A park maintenance job is not a satirical frame. It is just a job. The characters are doing the most ordinary work you can imagine, and then extraordinary things keep happening to them anyway. The title, in this reading, is not purely ironic. It is aspirational, or nostalgic, or mournful. This is a regular show about regular guys doing a regular job, except that the universe keeps intervening, except that one of your coworkers is immortal, and one of them is a Russian spy, and one of them fought death and won. The regularity is what the characters are always trying to get back to, and the show never lets them stay there for long. The normal show zoo setting is also worth dwelling on because of what was lost and what was gained in the change. A zoo where humans are the animals is a high-concept satirical premise, the kind of premise that would produce a specific kind of show, self-conscious, pointed, with a clear thesis about human nature visible in every episode. It is a show that announces its own intelligence. A park where a blue jay and a raccoon do groundskeeping work is not that. It is a show that hides its intelligence in the specific texture of the work, in the small failures and small victories of maintenance and management and friendship. The change from zoo to park was the change from satire to something less easily categorized, and it is probably why the show lasted 8 seasons instead of burning bright for 2. The Cartoonstitute project, the Cartoon Network initiative that greenlit regular show, deserves credit as one of the stranger and more consequential institutional decisions in American children's television history. The logic of the project was essentially, give young animators the resources to make pilots with no network interference. Let them make whatever they actually want to make, rather than what they think the network wants, and see what happens. Only 2 shows ultimately came out of it as full series, Regular Show and Uncle Grandpa. And Regular Show is the one that lasted, one of the most critically acclaimed and audience-beloved cartoons of the 2010s, emerging from a development structure that was designed to keep the network's hands off the work while it was being made. The counterfactual is hard to avoid. If Regular Show's development had been subjected to normal network notes, the process by which executives with content responsibility read pitches and flag concerns and request changes, it is reasonable to wonder whether the show that resulted would have been the show that Quintel made. The drug trip student film that he sent as a mood reference would presumably not have survived the development process. The percolator and the 420 clocks and the Clockwork Orange unicorn and the inverted Yo Mama jokes would probably not have made it in. The result might have been a competent, pleasant children's cartoon. It probably would not have been a show with 8 seasons of mythology and a finale where the most innocent character in the cast ends the universe by flying into the sun. The Cartoonstitute was discontinued after its initial run, the show it produced that lasted, and the fact that Regular Show became one of the defining properties of that era for Cartoon Network represents a very specific argument about the value of creative autonomy in children's television. One thing that deserves more attention is how the show handled its relationship to 1980s culture. The use of Working for the Weekend by Loverboy as an early soundtrack choice was not random. The 1980s is the emotional home of Regular Show, in a very specific way. It is the decade when the adults who made the show were children, and the decade when the forms they are drawing on, the action film, the buddy comedy, the synthesizer score, the arcade game, were at their cultural peak. Regular Show did not use the 80s as ironic distance, the way a lot of nostalgic media does. It used them with genuine affection, which is a different thing. The soundtrack choices throughout the series reflect this consistently. The show plays real licensed music, not parodies of real music or generic genre approximations. Loverboy, Journey, Europe. The use of these songs is partly an Easter egg for adult viewers who recognize them, but it is also a tonal commitment. These songs are being used seriously, in scenes where they work dramatically, not just as gags. When an 80s rock song plays over a moment of genuine triumph or genuine loss in a Regular Show episode, the show is not laughing at the song, it is using it. This tonal sincerity is one of the show's secrets that is easy to mistake for something else. Regular Show is funny, often very funny, and its comedy frequently involves absurdity and incongruity, but it does not deploy sincerity ironically. When the show wants you to feel something, it comes at you straight, without the protective layer of irony that a lot of contemporary animation uses to avoid the risk of seeming earnest. Excellent is an extremely sincere episode about friendship and sacrifice wrapped inside a food challenge parody. The sincerity is not embarrassed by the parody context. The show believes in both things simultaneously. This quality extends to how the show handles mortality and loss. Regular Show is, by the standards of TV PG animated comedy, a show that takes death seriously. Characters die, not in ways that are reversed by the next episode, not in ways that are explained away or played purely for comedy. The revelation of Skips's history involves a death, Mona's, that has shaped everything about a character for centuries and cannot be undone. Pops' sacrifice at the end is final. He does not come back. This seriousness about death is unusual in children's animation, and is arguably the thing the UK broadcast standards were responding to with their, "Well, he's gone" edits. Those edits were not wrong about what the show was doing. They were responding to a genuine content choice by the creators, which was to make death in the show actually mean something. The UK decision was to soften that meaning for younger audiences. The American version was to let it stand. The show's handling of friendship is the other thing that deserves more attention in any analysis of its secrets, because friendship is not usually a subject that children's television handles with complexity. The typical friendship arc in children's animation is either stable and untroubled, the friends are friends and remain friends, or it involves a falling out followed by a reconciliation. Regular Show does both of these things, but it does them in the middle of a larger portrait of what long-term friendship actually costs. Mordecai and Rigby have been friends long enough that their friendship has become a kind of habitat. They are each other's primary reality. The show understands that this kind of closeness is both a resource and a liability. It gives you someone who will train for an impossible food challenge to win you a hat, and it also gives you someone whose bad habits and selfish impulses you have learned to accommodate in ways that are not always good for either of you. The show is honest about both sides of this without being preachy about it. It just shows you the thing, repeatedly, from different angles, and lets you draw your own conclusions. The relationship between the two characters is also the place where the show's origins in 2 in the AM PM are most clearly visible. The convenience store slackers in that film were defined by their shared situation, both working the overnight shift, both experiencing the same trip, both navigating the same impossible unreality together. Mordecai and Rigby are defined by the same thing. They are always navigating the unreality together. Whatever the supernatural threat is, whatever the consequence of their latest poor decision, they face it as a pair. The show's entire emotional architecture rests on that pairing, and it is the thing Quintel took from his drug trip student film and brought into a children's cartoon. Two people alone together in something strange, trying to figure out what is real. Benson's arc across the show's run is a case where the hidden content is not a reference or a lore detail, but a character portrait that takes years to assemble fully. Benson is introduced as the obstacle. He is the authority figure, the one with the power to fire the protagonists, and his constant near firings provide the comedic tension that drives a significant portion of the show's episode structure. He is loud, he turns red, he gives speeches that are cut off before they become full threats. He is the joke. But there are episodes scattered throughout the run where the show briefly shifts perspective and lets you see Benson from the inside, and what you find there is not just an angry manager. You find someone who was once passionate about music, about drumming specifically, who ended up managing a municipal park and has spent years trying to find dignity in work that does not particularly reward the things he was actually good at. His rage is not random. It is the rage of someone who cares about something that does not want to be cared about in the way he cares about it. He wants the park to be good. He wants his staff to take it seriously. He cannot make them do either, and the gap between what he wants and what he can produce is where all the comedy lives. This portrait is assembled across episodes that are mostly about other things. You would not summarize the show by describing Benson's inner life, because the show does not prioritize it. But it is there, consistent across the full run, and when you see it clearly in retrospect, it makes the character considerably more interesting than a simple angry boss archetype. Benson is someone who found himself managing a park full of supernatural events and immortal beings, and a raccoon who dropped out of high school, and a goat who turned out to be a spy, and he tried to manage it professionally, and he mostly failed, and the failure was not entirely his fault. The show's awards history is a final thread worth pulling before we look more closely at the specific seasons. The Emmy for Excellent in 2012 is the landmark achievement, but the full nomination record tells a more complete story. 6 Emmy nominations across the run, 7 Annie Award nominations including one for Mark Hamill specifically for his performance as Skips, 3 British Academy Children's Awards nominations. This is not the profile of a show that was beloved but critically overlooked. This is the profile of a show that was regularly being nominated across multiple institutions in multiple countries, a show that the industry considered genuinely excellent across the full scope of what animation can do. The Annie Award nomination for Hamill is specifically interesting because Annie Awards recognize individual performances rather than programs. which means the nomination is a statement that Hamill's voice work as Skips was considered outstanding on its own terms. This is not obvious for a character who is not the lead and who does not deliver the kinds of speeches or emotional moments that traditionally attract acting awards attention. Skips is the calm one, the functional one, the one who fixes things. The performance required Hamill to play restraint and quiet capability in a register that is less showy than the kind of work that usually gets noticed. The nomination says that the people who evaluate animation performance specifically saw what he was doing and thought it was excellent. The Billy Mitchell story also has a coda that deserves its own careful telling. The Garrett Bobby Ferguson character appears in seasons 2 and 3, and Mitchell filed a lawsuit that was dismissed in 2015, with the court ruling that the giant floating alien head was too different from a real human to constitute misappropriation. At the time of the dismissal, Mitchell's public reputation in competitive gaming, while already somewhat contested, was officially intact. He was still a recognized record holder. 3 years later, in 2018, Twin Galaxies stripped Mitchell of his Donkey Kong and Pac-Man records, following an investigation into whether the scores were legitimately achieved. This was a significant and disputed decision that Mitchell has challenged, and the controversy has been ongoing in ways that a single script cannot resolve. But the shape of the regular show story in retrospect is striking. The show created a villain based on a real public figure. That figure sued and lost, and then years later the real public figure's public identity underwent a revision along exactly the lines the villain parody had satirized. GBF was a fraud whose championships were built on deception. The real-world controversy that followed the lawsuit involved questions about whether Mitchell's claimed records were legitimate. Whether this was prescience, good character intuition, or coincidence is not something I can resolve. The pattern is there, and it is striking, and it is the kind of thing the show was somehow always doing, putting something in the frame that turned out to be more accurate than it seemed. Quintel said in a 2026 Variety interview, reflecting on the entire run of the show, something that captures the quality I find most interesting about regular shows' secrets. He said that when he thinks back on those days, he sometimes wonders how they ever got it greenlit, because some of the stuff they were doing was so weird. And then he adds that it was making them laugh. That is the key. Not making audiences laugh, not making test groups laugh, but making the people in the room laugh. The secrets and the hidden references and the adult humor and the drug trip lore were not calculated audience development strategies. They were the natural output of a group of people who were deeply themselves, who trusted that if something was genuinely strange and funny to them, it could be made strange and funny to someone else. The cover-ups, the censored lines and the reanimated mouths and the international edits were the predictable response of a broadcast system to content that exceeded its parameters. They were not malicious. Cartoon Network was running a children's network with a TV PG rating and genuine responsibilities to its audience, and when regular show pushed past those responsibilities, the network pushed back. What is interesting is not that the system corrected for excesses. It is that the excesses were there at all, and that so many of them made it through. Let us go back to the early seasons and spend more time in the specific texture of what the show was doing, because the cover-up story and the hidden secret story are not two separate threads. They are the same thread, and you can only really see how it runs if you pay attention to what the show was building in those first 3 seasons before anyone fully understood what it was going to become. Season 1 has 12 episodes. It established the core loop of the show so efficiently that by the time it ended in November of 2010, the audience already knew what to expect. A mundane problem would appear. Mordecai and Rigby would make it worse through a combination of laziness and ambition, and the solution would involve something supernatural or bizarre before returning, usually, to a normal state by the end. The show was honest about this loop from the start. It did not pretend to be something other than what it was. But the first season was also doing something else in its margins, something most viewers were not tracking in real time. It was establishing a hierarchy of the supernatural. The Destroyer of Worlds is unleashed in the 2nd episode. The Sorcerer is introduced as a figure of genuine menace, someone who exists outside the normal social contract of the park. And by early in the following season, Death himself will be at the door, not played as a monster or a villain, but as a competitive entity with rules, someone you can beat at his own game if you know the rules and play well. These are not one-off gag characters. They are the first layers of the mythology that the show will spend 7 more seasons building into something much larger. What is worth noting is that the show was doing this in the margins of TV PG television, under a rating that was designed for content that might include mild language and occasional fantasy violence. The standard model of that rating presupposes that the content is contained, that the fantasy is decorative rather than structural. Regular show was using the fantasy structurally. The death character does not exist to generate a single joke and disappear. He is part of the logic of the show's universe, a participant in a consistent metaphysics that the show is quietly laying out across dozens of episodes. The network did not flag this, because there was nothing to flag. It was all technically within the parameters. It was what you did with those parameters that was unusual. Season 2 is where the show started pushing more deliberately, and where the international edits we discussed earlier became necessary. The escalation is visible in the episode premises. You go from a squirrel damages the house, to a brain-enhancing drug creates an intelligence gap between friends, to a giant naked Pops exits a shower and traumatizes everyone. The show was not becoming less responsible over time. It was becoming more confident about how far its premise could stretch before it had to pull back. And the answer, as established by the international edits, is that the answer differed depending on which country you were in. What I find underappreciated about the Season 2 censorship story is the asymmetry. The episodes that got refused or heavily edited in Asia Pacific were, in many cases, middle of the road by American broadcast standards. More Smarter is not an outrageous episode by the standards of regular American children's television. Its drug premise is handled as comedy with consequences, not as advocacy. The brain-enhancing drug makes the character smarter, and then the character is a jerk to everyone, and then it wears off, and they have learned nothing. This is a standard comedic structure. The refusal in Asia Pacific was not responding to the execution of the premise, but to the premise itself. A character taking a substance to alter their cognitive state. The regulatory logic was categorical rather than evaluative. This matters because it reveals something about what the show was doing and how different institutional frameworks respond to it. American content standards in 2011 were more concerned with explicit language and visible violence than with premise-level content. The Asia-Pacific framework was the reverse. The show's hidden adult content largely survived the American process because the American process was looking in a different direction. It did not survive in Asia-Pacific because the Asia-Pacific process was looking at exactly the thing regular show was doing. The United Kingdom's edits are interesting for a different reason. The UK's concerns were practical rather than categorical. The cinder block on the gas pedal was cut because a child might replicate it. Party Pete's crotch thrust was cut because it was a specific kind of physical performance that UK pre-watershed standards were sensitive to. The death language softening, "he's gone," instead of "he died," reflects a long-standing UK broadcasting tradition around how death is discussed in children's content. A tradition rooted in the idea that blunt mortality language in entertainment, directed at very young viewers, requires contextualization that a self-contained 10-minute cartoon cannot provide. None of these rationales are absurd on their own terms. The UK was not wrong to be concerned about cinder blocks or death language in children's programming. What is interesting is that the specific edits these rationales produced create, in aggregate, a version of regular show that is slightly incoherent. A show in which some moments of physical consequence are visible and others are not. In which characters disappear without dying. In which a man taps his foot where he should be thrusting his hips. The version that aired in the UK was a different show from the one that aired in the United States. Not dramatically different, not in a way most viewers would have consciously registered, but different in 100 small ways that accumulated across seasons into something that was the same story told with different emphases. The early seasons introduced a character who deserves more attention than he usually gets in these kinds of surveys, and that is Death. Death first turns up in the Season 2 episode Over the Top, as a wager opponent, someone whose specific domain is the permanent end of things, and who can be beaten at a contest if you know the rules well enough. The show's treatment of Death is not fearful or reverential. It is sporting. Death is a competitive entity with a code, someone who honors the terms of a fairly conducted match. This is a specific cosmological argument about what death means in regular show's universe. It is not arbitrary. It is not malicious. It is a system with rules that can be understood and, in principle, negotiated. This matters for the mythology because Pops' eventual sacrifice, flying into the sun with anti-Pops, is not a defeat, it is a choice. The show's cosmology has established from very early in its run that death in this universe is not something that simply happens to you. It is something you can refuse, contest, or in Pops' case, embrace on your own terms. Skips was given immortality. Tecmo has persisted across centuries through augmentation. Pops sacrifices himself deliberately to break a cycle. The show builds a consistent relationship to mortality across its entire run, and death arriving that early is the first piece of that architecture. The pattern of the show-building mythology in the Season 1 episodes, in premises that appear to be standalone comedies, is not something most viewers saw on first broadcast. The pace of weekly television is not the pace at which mythology accumulates. You watch an episode on a Tuesday, you go to school the next day, you might not catch the rerun. The lore that the show was building was invisible at broadcast pace, and visible only to people watching the whole thing consecutively, which in 2010 was a smaller group than it became after streaming made the entire run available at once. Regular show's mythology was, in some sense, designed for an audience that did not fully exist yet when the show started. Streaming changed what the show was. It had aired week to week for 7 years, building an audience that was loyal, but that experienced the show at broadcast pace, one episode at a time with days or weeks between. When the full run became available to watch consecutively, a different kind of viewer found it. One who could see the mythology accumulate in real time, who could watch the skips detail in Season 1 and connect it to the revelation in Season 5 without a 4-year gap in between. That viewer experienced a different show. Not a better or worse one, just different, in the way that reading a novel in one sitting is different from reading it a chapter at a time over months. The show was built for both experiences, and it works differently in each of them. This also means that regular show has been quietly getting a second life through streaming rediscovery. People who were too young to watch it when it originally aired are finding it now and experiencing it as a completed work, with all 8 seasons available simultaneously. For those viewers, the secrets and the lore and the censored content are not things that need to be excavated from a half-remembered childhood viewing. They are there to be found on a first pass, if you are paying attention. The show rewards that kind of first pass in a way that most children's animation from the same era does not. Because regular show was always building something underneath its surface, always leaving more in the frame than you needed to see. Season 3 is where the show really starts doing something strange with its own mythology, and it does it in the most low-key way possible. Skips Strikes is an episode about bowling. Skips, who is immortal and has been alive for centuries, and is the only person at the park who knows how to deal with supernatural emergencies, is very good at bowling. The episode has him in a high-stakes match, and the stakes involve the supernatural, and the way it is resolved has implications for the mythology. But the episode is framed as a bowling episode. The cosmic weight is wrapped in a sports comedy. This is the show's most consistent structural secret across its entire run. It hides its lore in genre episodes. The supernatural elements that are building towards something are always wrapped in a familiar genre container. The bowling episode, the talent show episode, the road trip episode. Regular show takes the shape of the genre and puts something stranger inside it, and you can watch the whole series consuming only the genre shell and be perfectly entertained and never see what is accumulating underneath. The Emmy-winning episode from Season 3, Excellent, is a good example of this. The episode aired on February 27, 2012, and it is at its surface level a parody of food challenge culture, the kind of reality TV segment where someone tries to eat an implausibly large amount of food in a limited time. Rigby gets into a coma attempting a restaurant challenge. Mordecai, motivated by loyalty and grief and guilt, trains to complete the challenge himself to win the hat Rigby wanted. There is supernatural intervention. The episode is genuinely funny. It also contains, in the sequences where Mordecai is trying to reach Rigby in the coma, some of the most emotionally direct material the show had produced to that point. The Emmy win for Excellent is one of the stranger facts in the show's awards history, because the episode is not obviously prestige television. It is a cartoon about a food challenge. But the reason it won, the reason it was submitted, and the reason the voters responded to it is that it is a story about two people who would do anything for each other, told in the language of a children's food parody, and the emotional truth underneath the joke is real. The Academy recognized that, and in doing so they were recognizing something the show had been doing since its first season, using the genre container to make real feelings legible in a format where they were not supposed to exist. By season 4, the show had found its rhythm and was operating at a level of confidence about its own premise that is visible in the episode order. Exit 9B, the season 4 premiere that aired on October 1st, 2012, is one of the most ambitious things the show ever attempted for a single episode. It drew 3,047,000 viewers, which is near the show's record. The episode involves the park staff returning from what they experience as a temporary absence to find their home occupied by villains, and the resolution requires summoning every antagonist the show has ever defeated back to life to fight them. It is a greatest hits episode designed for the audience that had been watching since the beginning, a reward for sustained attention. This is another form of hidden content that is worth naming. The show, from very early in its run, was structurally rewarding long-term viewers in ways that casual viewers or newcomers could not fully access. An episode like Exit 9B is technically comprehensible if you have not seen the previous 3 seasons, but the emotional payoff requires the inventory of things you have watched those antagonists do. The show was building a memory that it spent occasionally, and spending it in ways that were invisible unless you were paying the right kind of attention. One small detail that belongs here, in the season 4 section of the timeline, is what Quintel said about the original pitch. He has said that he did not think he could pitch the show verbally, that trying to explain the concept out loud to executives would not have worked, because the concept was too strange to land as a description. He pitched with a storyboard. He sent the CalArts short alongside it. He let the work speak for itself, because the work was the only thing that could accurately represent what the show was going to be. This is a specific kind of professional self-awareness, knowing that your idea cannot survive being summarized, that it requires full contact with the thing itself, and trusting that enough to go into a pitch meeting with a storyboard instead of a pitch. The show that resulted was the one Quintel had in his head, not a negotiated compromise between that idea and someone else's comfort level. The Cartoonstitute structure made that possible. The storyboard is what got it across the threshold. The film, regular show, the movie, which came out between season 5 and season 6, is worth spending more time on because its production circumstances are unusual, and because it contains elements that were specifically enabled by the theatrical context rather than the television one. When Cartoon Network approached Quintel during season 4 about the 40-minute special, and he counter-proposed a full theatrical film, he was making a very specific argument about what the show deserved and what the story required. A 40-minute special is still television. It is still a children's cartoon operating under television constraints. A film is something else. A film can have a different pacing, a different relationship to its emotional material, a different physical scale. Quintel understood that the story he wanted to tell required the format he asked for. The film's premise involves time travel to high school, Rigby's past, and the original team of people who would eventually become the park staff. It is, in structural terms, a story about how the present was made, which is a different kind of narrative than the weekly escalation and resolution the television show excelled at. The film could be longer, slower, and more emotionally costly than any single episode, and it used those affordances fully. The deleted scenes included on the DVD release suggest a version of the film that was even more sprawling, and the fact that those scenes exist, that there was enough material to cut, tells you something about the ambition of what was originally attempted. The film's modest reported budget and its worldwide gross, the exact figures of which should be understood as estimates with some uncertainty in how theatrical and home video revenue were combined, represent something important for the show's legacy. Regular Show was not just a beloved critical favorite. It was a commercially viable animated property that could produce a profitable film concurrent with a running television series. That is not a small achievement for a TV PG Cartoon Network show about a blue jay and a raccoon. Season 5 is where the mythology acceleration really begins. Skip's story, airing as a half-hour special on April 14, 2014, is the episode where everything the show has been implying about Skip's past becomes explicit. The show had been dropping hints for 4 seasons. Skips is older than he looks, Skips has fought things before. Skips knows things about the supernatural world that no one else at the park knows. Skip's story fills in the how and the why. What is interesting about the revelation is how it recontextualizes every previous Skips episode. Think about every scene where Skips skips. Every establishing shot of him moving across the park. The skip is not a character quirk or a visual gag. It is a centuries-old gesture of love and loss. It is Skips continuing to do something a dead woman once liked watching him do, because stopping would be a form of forgetting, and immortality means he has the time to carry the gesture indefinitely. Once you know this, you cannot unknow it. Every subsequent skip in seasons 6, 7, and 8 carries the weight of Mona's death. This is the kind of recontextualization that regular ongoing television almost never pulls off successfully, because it requires a level of planning and confidence that is uncommon in a medium where shows are typically developed week to week and renewed season by season. The skip was designed as Skip's defining physical characteristic at the very beginning, and the mythology was built backward from it, or forward from it, depending on how you think about these things. Either Quintel always knew why Skip skipped and was waiting for the right moment to reveal it, or he had the detail and the mythology came later. Either way, the result is the same. A small physical choice made at the outset of the show becomes, by the 5th season, one of the most emotionally affecting pieces of character lore the show ever produced. Muscle Man's "My Mom" jokes deserve a longer examination than they usually get, because they are doing something structurally interesting that the surface-level reading misses. Muscle Man, whose real name is Mitch Sorenstein, tells a specific style of joke throughout the series. He will do or say something awkward or embarrassing, and then he will turn to whoever is nearby and say, "You know who else does this?" And they will say nothing, and he will say, "My mom." The joke is presented as a recurring gag, a bit that the other characters are tired of, but that Muscle Man seems to find endlessly satisfying. The adult version of the joke structure that My Mom is inverting is the Yo Mama joke, a well-established tradition of competitive insult humor in which someone makes an outlandish, usually sexual or degrading claim about their opponent's mother. Yo Mama jokes derive their impact from the humiliation directed at the target. Muscle Man has taken this structure and turned it around. The joke is about his own mother. It positions his mother as someone desirable or impressive or capable of the thing being referenced, and the effect is that Muscle Man himself becomes the butt of his own joke, because the implication about his mother is the same kind of claim the original joke form would make about an opponent's parent. Children watching the show heard a non sequitur that the adult characters clearly found tiresome. Adult viewers who recognized the inverted structure of the joke understood what the show was actually saying about Muscle Man's family life, and probably found it considerably funnier. This is the most sophisticated version of regular show's dual audience strategy. It is not a visual reference hidden in the background that requires film literacy to decode. It is a joke structure built into the recurring catchphrase of a main character that requires cultural literacy about a specific tradition of American humor to fully decode, and that is genuinely funny in a different way depending on whether you have that literacy. Muscle Man is one of the show's most beloved characters, and his catchphrase works for both audiences simultaneously, as a harmless non sequitur for children and as something considerably more pointed for adults. Before we get to the space arc, there are two things about the show's production history that rarely come up in these conversations, and that matter for understanding how the whole thing was possible. The first is Quintel's path before regular show. He did not arrive at his own show without preparation. He spent years working in other people's rooms, absorbing how the production process worked, learning what the creative constraints of television animation actually felt like from the inside. He worked as a storyboard artist and writer on Camp Lazlo, which ran from 2005 to 2008. Then he worked as a creative director on The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, which ran from 2008 to 2010. Both shows were made at Cartoon Network Studios. By the time regular show was greenlit in 2009, Quintel had been working inside the network's production system for 4 years. He knew how the pipeline operated. He knew what the constraints were. He knew, specifically, which constraints were structural and which were negotiable. This matters because the adult content in regular show, the hidden references, and the lore and the dual audience jokes required production knowledge to survive. You have to know what the review process looks for in order to know what it does not look for. You have to know how storyboards get approved and at which stage content flagging happens in order to understand what can survive to the final episode. Quintel had spent 4 years learning exactly this, not as a calculated plan to hide things, but as the natural consequence of being attentive to how the work was actually made. When it was his show, he knew where there was room. The second production detail that matters is how Rigby actually came to exist. The research record on this is consistent. Rigby was not in 2 in the AM PM. The 2 characters in that film who became prototypes became Mordecai and Benson. Rigby was created separately, later in the development process, when Quintel drew a raccoon hula hooping. That is the entire origin story, a raccoon hula hooping. The character who becomes one half of the show's central friendship, whose arc from irresponsible dropout to loving husband is one of the most complete character trajectories in 8 seasons of television, who graduates high school and marries Eileen and has children, began as a raccoon hula hooping in a sketch. If Quintel had reached for a different animal or a different motion, Rigby might never have existed in the form he takes. The show's DNA runs in a different direction when you put a raccoon hula hooping on a piece of paper at CalArts, and Quintel pulled that thread. The pairing of Mordecai and Rigby as a creative unit is not just a character choice. It is a structural commitment with specific formal properties. Mordecai is the one who has aspirations but cannot execute on them. He knows what he should be doing. He simply does not do it most of the time, because doing it would require a kind of directness he struggles to access. Rigby is the one who acts first and thinks later, whose failures are spectacular and whose recoveries are hard-won. The gap between them, Mordecai's paralysis and Rigby's impulsivity, is the engine that generates almost every episode. Put them together in any situation, and they will produce the wrong outcome for different reasons. And the effort to correct the outcome is where the story lives. This is the show's core machine, and it mirrors the relationship between the 2 characters in 2 in the AM PM, with a precision that suggests Quintel understood this dynamic from the very beginning. 2 people, shared situation. One is more cautious, one is less cautious. The balance is off. Something happens. They have to figure it out together. The show also had a relationship to its own ratings that is worth understanding. The premiere numbers, 2,097,000 viewers for the double premiere in September of 2010, were strong but not record-setting. What happened in the seasons that followed was a sustained growth. Seasons 1 and 2 ranking number 1 in their time slots among key boy demographics across all of television, according to Nielsen data. The show was not a slow build to an audience that eventually found it. It found its audience almost immediately and held it. The episodes that broke the viewership ceiling, Terror Tales of the Park 2, at 3,109,000 viewers, Exit 9B, at 3,047,000 viewers, came later in the run, when the mythology had accumulated enough weight to produce event episodes that rewarded sustained viewing. The show's highest-rated individual episodes are all, characteristically, either mythology events or Halloween specials. This tells you something about what the audience came to the show for. They were there for the ordinary Mordecai and Rigby stuff, the weekly comedy of the park and the jobs and the friendships. But the moments that produced the highest numbers were the ones where the mythology took over, and the show became something else. The audience had been paying attention. When the show spent that accumulated capital, they showed up in numbers. The Art of Regular Show, the official art book published on September 15, 2015, is a production document that makes visible something the show itself rarely acknowledged: the scale and deliberateness of the creative work underneath the comedy. The book contains concept art from the earliest development phases, original storyboards, and interviews with cast and crew. What it makes visible is the gap between first ideas for these characters and the final versions. How many iterations Benson went through before settling on the gumball machine design. How the park's layout evolved. How specific visual choices that seem natural and inevitable in the finished show were the result of deliberate aesthetic decisions by people who had strong opinions about what they were making. The storyboards are particularly revealing. Regular show's storyboards were drawn on paper, traditionally, without digital tools. The physical quality of those drawings, the specific marks made by pencils and whiteout and post-it notes, carries a different information than a digital document does. You can see where someone pressed harder, where a drawing was changed and changed again, where a gag was worked through visually in a way that required multiple attempts to get right. The book is evidence that the people who made Regular Show knew it was something worth documenting, and that the intelligence of the finished show was the result of enormous physical effort, not a happy accident. Let us talk about the space arc more carefully, because Season 8, which Cartoon Network titled Regular Show in Space, is one of the more unusual things a children's network has done with an ongoing series. The decision to literally put the cast of a Parks and Recreation comedy into outer space for an entire season was made at the end of Season 7, and its execution required the show to fully commit to a different register. This was no longer a show where the supernatural was an interruption of the ordinary. This was the show abandoning the ordinary entirely, and asking whether its characters could function in a context stripped of every familiar element. Season 7 ended with the park being enclosed in a dome and launched into space. The characters leave Earth. They are gone. The show spends its entire final season in orbit, and the mythology that had been quietly accumulating since Season 1 finally occupies the foreground. The show became, in its last season, something that looked less like a workplace comedy and more like a science fiction adventure story, and the transition was handled without the kind of tonal rupture that usually accompanies this kind of shift. It worked because the mythology had been there all along, patient and legible for anyone who had been paying attention. The final season also resolved Mordecai and Rigby's arcs in ways that had been set up years earlier. Rigby's high school graduation, which happens in Season 7 before the space arc begins, is a moment that the show had been building towards since the first season. Rigby is the character who dropped out of high school because of a choice connected to Mordecai, and the weight of that unfinished business has been part of his characterization for years. When he finally graduates, it matters in a way that is disproportionate to the event itself, because the event is not really about high school. It is about Rigby deciding to stop being someone who leaves things unfinished. Mordecai's arc is less cleanly resolved, and this is by design. The romantic plot, the oscillation between Margaret and CJ, is partly a story about a specific kind of emotional paralysis that Quintel apparently found true to a certain kind of person and a certain period of young adulthood. Mordecai knows what he feels and is consistently unable to act on it in a straightforward way. The resolution of the love triangle in the finale, with Mordecai marrying neither Margaret nor CJ, but instead a bat character named Steph, has generated more fan discussion than almost any other ending choice the show made. The reading that makes the most narrative sense to me is this. Mordecai's pattern with Margaret and CJ was part of a specific dynamic that he and those characters had established over years. Each relationship was freighted with history and expectation and the accumulated weight of everything they had been through together. The character could not move forward inside those dynamics, because the dynamics themselves had become the obstacle. Steph represents a relationship that exists outside all of that. No shared history, no pattern to repeat, no role to fall back into. Mordecai ends up with someone he did not have a complicated past with, and the flash forward shows him genuinely happy. Whether you find this satisfying depends on your investment in the earlier relationships, but it is not a random choice. It is a coherent argument about a specific way people can get unstuck. The character whose finale outcome is most quietly interesting is Benson. Benson, the gumball machine, the park manager who spent 8 seasons threatening to fire Mordecai and Rigby, who descended into rage on a near-daily basis, who was the bureaucratic authority figure that the show's comedy required as a foil for the slackers' chaos. In the finale and the flash forward, Benson is shown to have had a full life beyond the park. He is not just the angry manager. He is a person who had dreams and who pursued them, even if the show often used him as the representative of institutional constraint. Benson's rage was, for most of the show's run, played purely as comedy. The escalating intensity of his near firings was the joke, but there were episodes, scattered throughout the run, where the show briefly pulled back from the comedy and showed that Benson's intensity was not simply anger, but something closer to genuine care. He cared about the park. He cared, in his frustrated, inarticulate way, about the people who worked there. The finale's treatment of him reflects a long-term understanding of the character that was present, but not always visible in the weekly escalation and rage format. Pops' sacrifice, the genuine climax of the show's mythology, is the moment that most completely justifies the long accumulation of lore. The cosmic battle, the 14 billion-year cycle, the sacrifices of the characters who fought to get Pops to the moment of the final confrontation. All of it leads to a choice that is not a battle. Pops does not defeat Anti-Pops by being stronger. He defeats him, if defeat is even the right word, by refusing to continue the cycle. He takes Anti-Pops with him into the sun and ends both of them, which ends the pattern that has governed the universe for longer than human history. The show's message in this moment is that cycles of violence, however ancient and however cosmic, end only when someone decides not to fight. This is a remarkably pointed conclusion for a children's cartoon to arrive at. And what stays with me is that the show delivered the message not as a speech or a lesson, but as an action. A physical choice made by the gentlest and most naive character in the cast. Pops, who spent 8 seasons being confused by everything, who could not understand why anyone would be unkind, who expressed wonder at the ordinary workings of the world as if everything in it was worth marveling at, is the one who ends the war. The character whose innocence was always treated as a kind of joke turns out to be the most consequential being in the history of the universe. That reversal is the show's deepest secret, and it was hidden in plain sight the entire time. Now, a detail about the finale that connects back to the show's origins in a way that still surprises me when I think about it. During the sequence where Pops is making his final journey and the universe is processing the end of the cycle, the show includes footage from The Naive Man from Lolliland, the 2005 CalArts film. The character who first appeared in a 48-hour student film because a student pulled a word from a hat, who became Pops Maellard, who spent 8 seasons at a municipal park being confused by everything, goes out with a callback to the very first version of himself. Quintel closes the loop. The show says, this is where we started, and this is what it became, and these are the same thing. The production detail that makes this meaningful is that the Naive Man from Lolliland footage in the finale is presumably actual footage from the original student film, not a recreation. Which means Quintel had this film, this 21-year-old CalArts short made in a 48-hour sprint, and he was always planning to bring it home. Or he made the decision late in the show's run and found that the material supported it. Either way, the effect is the same. The show's ending contains the show's beginning, and the two things are indistinguishable from each other in the moment it matters most. The 2026 revival deserves more attention than it has gotten in most discussions of the show's legacy, because its premise is specifically designed to engage with the secrets and lore that the original run left unresolved. Regular show, The Lost Tapes, uses a framing device of VHS tapes left by Pops from the afterlife. This is not accidental. Pops is dead. He sacrificed himself. The revival cannot bring him back without undoing the meaning of his sacrifice. Instead, it finds a way to make his perspective available to the narrative through a posthumous archive, tapes he made before or during the events of the show that were never seen, stories he wanted to tell. This framing does something interesting for the show's mythology. It repositions Pops not as the naive observer he was treated as throughout the original run, but as a knowing witness who understood more than he let on. If these are Pops's tapes, they are Pops's account of events, his perspective on what happened. And Pops, who turned out to be the most cosmically significant being the show ever introduced, is a very different narrator than the confused, sweet, helpless presence he appeared to be in the original series. The framing also addresses the secrets and cover-ups premise directly. These are the lost tapes. They are the things that were not in the original broadcast. They are the version of events that was not shown. The revival is structured, at the level of its conceit, as an acknowledgement that the original show had hidden things, and that those hidden things are now going to be revealed. Whether every episode of the revival fully delivers on that promise is a question that the audience and critics are still working out. But the ambition of the framing is exactly right for a show that spent 8 seasons hiding half of what it was doing. The cast's return, all these voices back in the room together, is significant in ways that are easy to understate. Regular show's ensemble recording style was unusual, and the sound of those recordings, the natural rhythm of dialogue between actors who can hear each other breathe and respond in real time, is part of what made the original show feel alive. When Quintel says it is all old school, all these guys back in the room together, he is describing a specific choice to preserve the acoustic quality that distinguished the original show from most animated television. The voices have aged a little. The rhythms are the same. There is a question the revival raises that the original show never had to address. What is regular show without the park? The park was not just a setting. It was the container for the show's specific logic. The place where the supernatural was both managed and produced, where ordinary life and extraordinary events existed in the same space. When the show went to space in Season 8, it tested whether the characters could function without the park and found that they could, but only because they were together. The park is the characters, or the characters are the park. The Lost Tapes framing device sidesteps this question by anchoring the stories in memory rather than in a present-day location. The VHS tapes format is retrospective. These are things that happened. The show does not have to rebuild the park in order to tell stories set there, because the stories come to us as already concluded events, documented and archived by a character who knew their significance. This is, when you think about it, exactly what the Fall Asleep to format does. It takes something that already happened, a show that ran and ended, and it holds it still long enough for you to look at it slowly. Regular show ran fast. A lot of its secrets were hidden at full speed. The format we are in right now, lying here in the dark with the sound low and the pace unhurried, is actually the best possible format for this material, because the material rewards the person who slows down and looks closely. One of the things the show did in its later seasons that is easy to overlook, because it is quiet, and because the show does not draw attention to it, is let Muscle Man become a real person. He starts the series as a one-note supporting character, the loud guy who tells bad jokes and takes his shirt off. And for the first couple of seasons, that is essentially all he is. The "my mom" jokes are reliable. The shirtlessness is reliable. The character works as a recurring presence without asking anything more of itself. But somewhere in the middle of the run, the show adds something. Muscle Man has a girlfriend named Starla, who is also loud and also comfortable with herself in the same direct, unself-conscious way that Muscle Man is. Their relationship is not played as a punchline. The show does not treat them as comic grotesques who have found each other out of mutual inability to find anyone better. It treats them as two people who genuinely fit, whose loudness and directness and physicality are compatible in a way that produces a real relationship. Muscle Man proposes to Starla. The proposal is sincere. The show lets it be sincere. And when you stand back and look at the shape of Muscle Man's arc across the full series, you find that the character who was introduced as a joke gradually became one of the more fully realized members of the park staff. This is part of a larger pattern in the show that functions as its own kind of hidden content. Regular show is consistent about taking the joke characters seriously on their own terms. Pops is funny because he is innocent and naive and easily confused by the ordinary world. But the show never stops treating his innocence as real, as a genuine orientation toward existence rather than as a cognitive deficiency. High Five Ghost is funny because he is a ghost who hangs around a park and does ordinary work. But the show gives him a full social life and a career trajectory and a relationship with his brother that contains real stakes. The joke characters turn out to have inner lives, and the show quietly maintains those inner lives even when the plot does not require it. This consistency is the product of writers who cared about the characters as characters, not just as functions. It is not usually identified as a secret of the show because it is expressed in content rather than in hidden details or production choices. But it is a choice, and a deliberate one, and it is why the show holds up differently on a rewatch than it does on a first viewing. On a first viewing, you see the comedy. On a rewatch, you see the people. The Season 6 reveal of Thomas as a Russian spy is probably the show's most complete example of retroactive recontextualization. He had been present across multiple seasons as the naive intern who took abuse from everyone and learned slowly. The reveal that his name is Nikolai and that he has been an embedded intelligence operative the entire time does not just change the meaning of Thomas. It changes the texture of every scene he was in. All those moments where he was passive, where he absorbed criticism and humiliation from the park staff, were not moments of naivety. They were professional discipline. He was doing a job. His quietness was not weakness, it was tradecraft. The show does not ask you to go back and rewatch every Thomas scene with this knowledge. It does not point at the retroactive recontextualization and say, look at what we have been doing. It just makes the reveal and moves on. What is interesting about this approach is that it trusts the audience to do the work, to carry the new information back through their memory of the character and rebuild the portrait from there. This is the same trust the show extends across its entire run. It does not explain its own lore. It does not annotate its own secrets. It puts the things in the frame and lets you see them. The network's intervention after season 5 is also worth revisiting, now that we have the full picture of the show's arc. Quintel said in his 2026 interview that the network came to him and his team and told them to tone it down, to take some of the stuff out. The specific concerns were violence and sexually suggestive humor. Season 6, in the aftermath of this directive, is measurably different in tone from the first 5 seasons. The edges are softer, the escalation is less aggressive. The show is still itself, still funny, still building toward the mythology payoff, but it is doing it within a tighter set of constraints than it had previously operated under. What is remarkable is that the show survives this constraint period without losing the thread. The mythology continues to develop. Thomas's secret is revealed in season 6, one of the most significant reveals the show ever makes. Skip's history has already been established. The show is moving toward its cosmic conclusion even while the network is asking it to be less intense. The lore and the censored content are operating on separate tracks, and the lore track did not need the violence or the suggestive humor to function. It needed the character relationships and the mythological infrastructure, and those were left intact. This is the show's final secret in some ways. The things that Cartoon Network made regular show take out were the things that were easy to take out. The things that made the show genuinely unusual: the mythology, the sincerity, the dual audience structure, the 400-year grief Skips carries in his walk, the cosmic sacrifice that ends the universe, were not the kinds of content that network content standards know how to flag. You cannot flag a character's grief. You cannot flag a cosmological cycle of good and evil. You cannot flag the specific quality of two friends navigating unreality together. The cover-up process, when you look at the full picture, caught the surface and missed the depth. And the depth is what the show was actually about. That is the part that still gets me, years later, sitting with the whole history of this show, from the CalArts draft table to the 2026 revival. A network system designed to manage content for children was watching closely, catching language and crotch thrusts and cinder blocks on gas pedals, and underneath all of that, a show was quietly constructing an 8-season argument about mortality and friendship and cosmic sacrifice. The censors were looking at the words. The show was hiding something in the sentences. There are things in regular show that no weekly episodic viewing was going to surface. The 5 fingers on Skip's hand, the shadow on High Five Ghost, the VCR clock, the clockwork orange unicorn, the inverted Yo Mama structure of every single Muscle Man joke, the drug trip that started the whole thing. These are all details that exist in the show, that were placed there by people who were making something with more layers than the surface required, and that you simply would not see unless you were in exactly the kind of state you are in right now, lying still, paying the kind of attention that does not rush. Regular show ran for 8 seasons and 244 episodes, from September of 2010 to January of 2017. It won a Primetime Emmy Award for the episode Excellent in 2012. It was nominated 6 times total. Mark Hamill received an Annie Award nomination for voicing a character whose grief was coded into his walk. The show made a film that cost a modest amount and earned many times more. It created a villain who turned out to be a more accurate portrait of the person it was parodying than anyone could have predicted. It hid an acid trip in a children's cartoon, and it got away with it for 7 years. And when it finally came time to stop, Pops grabbed the end of the universe and flew into the sun. And now in 2026, J.G. Quintel and the original cast are back, with regular show, The Lost Tapes, which premiered on May 11th on Cartoon Network and arrived on HBO Max on June 8th. 40 new episodes, framed as stories from Pops' perspective in the afterlife, told through VHS tapes he left behind. The framing is fitting. VHS tapes are exactly the right object for a show built on 1980s nostalgia and hidden content. Because VHS tapes were the format on which people first discovered that the thing they remembered from television was not quite the same as the thing they had actually seen. You would watch a recording, and a detail would catch your eye, and you would rewind it again, and sit closer to the screen. Regular show was always that kind of show. It always rewarded the person who was paying attention and sitting close. The full cast came back. William Salyers, Sam Marin, Mark Hamill, Minty Lewis, Janie Haddad Tompkins. They recorded together in the same room, the same way they always had. Quintel told Variety that it was all old school, all these guys back in the room together. The show went to #2 worldwide on HBO Max within its first weeks. Rigby's still married to Eileen. Skips is still at the park. The VHS tapes are still running. And if you have been here this whole time, lying in the dark, following the whole history of this show from a 48-hour CalArts film to a cosmic sacrifice in deep space, then you already know the answer to the question the show was always quietly asking, which is, what is underneath the regular thing? What is inside the ordinary? What are two people capable of when the unreality will not stop and there is no one else to face it with? Regular Show spent 8 seasons finding out. The answer turns out to be everything. Everything that matters is in there, under the surface, waiting for whoever is paying attention. And somewhere in a convenience store on Halloween night, 2 guys are eating candy they should not have eaten, and the trip has not ended yet. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.